we have some new faces in the room, so, and we have some guests in the room as well. So thank you everyone for coming out on such a cold day. It's snowing out there. It's fun to get out and snow. So. I was saying earlier, I'm glad I got here, but I don't know if I'll get back. So I'll read the ethics statement. In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflicts of interest. Does any board member have any known conflicts of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in the particular matter involved.
Is there anyone wishing to make public comment at the beginning of the meeting? We've got a few attendees. If you'd like to make public comment, either raise your hand or put your name in the chat. So we've got Joe Minicozy. Joe, I'm going to take you off mute. If you could try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, that would be great.
I just have a quick question. Can we comment on the agenda item, or do you do the public comment before? I also see that there's public comment afterward. So I don't know how.
Yeah, we have two public comment periods. So the first is before all of the meeting items, and the second is at the end of the meeting. So I would say if you're interested in making a comment on the business items today, making those comments at the beginning would make sense.
Okay, cool. Yeah, is it possible for me to share my screen?
You should have that permission, yes.
I don't see it in the tools on this. I have Q&A, raise hand, chat, transcript, and closed captions.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Cool. Okay, so I get 3 minutes. Here we go. So I was one of the founding members of the Asheville Design Center, and we created a design center, a bunch of people. We had about 2,000 hours that we put in just 2006 alone. And we as designers and architects came forward on alternative number 4 and took this design and basically squeezed it down to a double-decker bridge to follow the CCC report. There's a lot of documentation on that. The CCC report was something that came before this body, the MPO, and it was to get the land back on Patton Avenue on both the west and the east sides of the bridge. We did drawings for this. We can give you all of this stuff, but basically it's taking Patton Avenue and growing it up and getting the tax base back. This was all seen as part of the CCC report. Many of you have seen this drawing of the before and after of the east side of the river. And basically, as we were drawing this, we were also running the numbers on the real estate value.
Joe, just FYI, we aren't able to see any images that you're sharing.
Oh, okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah. Now we can.
Cool. All right. Sorry about that. So, yeah, this is the CCC report. This is the roadway and the east and west banks. This is the Patton Avenue design. Was basically extending the Patton Avenue out to West Asheville and growing West Asheville up, so you'd have buildings out there. This is getting our tax base raised. So these are the drawings that were known for the before and after on the East Bank. And as everybody's drawing this, we're also running the numbers. So it's about $700 million, and that's 2009. So that's a lot more than that now. But this is an effect of $111 million of taxes to our city, county, and schools. As we were doing the work in 2008, DOT took our design and offered this idea on the right in May of 2008 of taking Patton Avenue and putting the highway over the top. We fought this design change. It wasn't in spirit of the CCC report. It also was going to screw up Patton Avenue. There was a document, several documents actually. The most important one is the one that went to Derek Weaver, where he agreed to remove it from our document. So On the left is alternative 4. In the middle is what we proposed, and this is what went to the public record in 2018 as the design of record. You'll note A, B, C, and D in the middle of the interchange. But basically, we weren't happy that things got widened out. The bridge got really wide. And it was a lot more like alternative 4 than we initially started, but that was the compromise. So somehow we've gone from this, the design of record and what we all agreed to and what was in the EIS, to this. So this is the new bridge that you're going to hear today. Walking under that bridge is the equivalent distance of walking almost across the inside of Sam's Club. It's going to be a lot of highway over the top of the road. There's going to be tremendous impacts. I didn't see anything in the record of decision that says that the highway goes over the top of Patton Avenue. This is Derek's approval. And also in EIS, we're supposed to know the economic impacts. And in the last EIS, they said there'd only be a 1% in value impact on our community. Asheville's worth 14 billion. 1% of 14 billion. They're assuming 140 million of damage, which is not true. We did the numbers. It's 700 million back in 29. It's probably a billion now with today's market. So we have the opportunity of having $516 million of new taxes on this corridor if we allow it to grow up. This isn't to say don't do the highway. It's just do this right. The EIS calls for the NEPA is supposed to be an interdisciplinary team of people making these decisions. And notice it says environmental design, arts, and planning. Yes, have engineers. I get that. But there needs to be other people at the table helping you make this decision. And right now there are 39 engineers. There's nobody in the design arts. This is what the design center brought forward, where architects, landscape architects, urban designers, and planners. So you need to understand these effects. It's not just doing a highway that's cheaper. There are effects to the real estate to that. And by law, we're supposed to see this. So I'll just close with this. Procedures must ensure that the environmental information is available to the public officials before decisions and actions are taken. The information must be of high quality, accurate scientific analysis, expert agency comments, and public scrutiny are essential. Somehow this highway got changed from in the pit to up over the top of a local road. And I don't know why that's happened. It doesn't seem like it was made with the spirit of all past plans. Some of us design center people are dead. That's cool. But some of us are still alive. And this needs to be talked about. So I just bring that forward. I'm here as a professional. If you want to talk about this economically, I do this all over the planet. And I hate to see my own community shoot itself in the foot this way.
Thank you, Jeff. There will be available for comments at the end as well. So if anyone else would like to comment at the end of the meeting. Next on the agenda is the amendments to the 2024-33 Transportation Improvement Program.
And I will hand that over to Hannah. Just a quick reminder that the TIP amendments, the Transportation Improvement Program amendments that you guys see regularly, that is part of the approvals that are required for funding for transportation projects. So for projects to be fully authorized for moving forward with especially federal funds or projects requiring federal action, the State Board of Transportation has to take action as well as the MPOs. So Hannah, please take it away.
So we have a significant number of amendments this month. I believe there's about 50, so there is a link in the agenda packet to the TIP amendment summaries. But the ones that I would like to highlight are there's officially from the STIP the segmentation of A10AA. This project is going to be segmented into A, B, C, D, E, F, G, J, and K sections. And then once this project is fully segmented, we'll be deleting the original A10AA project from the STIP. So we're just going to be moving forward with the segmented sections. There's also multiple transit amendments, including programming funds for 5311 and 5310 capital projects, replacement vehicles, and transit routine maintenance for both Buncombe County and Henderson County. And then also one to bring to your attention is U5019B. It's being reopened after previously being closed in 2022. This is the French Broad River West Greenway that's managed by the city of Asheville. This reopening this project would allow the city of Asheville to invoice the MPO for about $713,000 of previously unobliged funds from that project.
Yeah, just to note with that last project, with U5019B, the French Broad River West Greenway, that project closed in 2022. And so, at some point, recently it was found that, as Hannah mentioned, an invoice of about $713,000 was found that needed to be processed. We're still working with NCDOT about whether or not a project that had been closed several years previously can be reopened. But either way, the first step in that process is getting MPO approval for tip amendments. We've done a little bit of work with the SIP unit on making sure that this wouldn't impact any other project in the MPO. We're confident that it won't at this point. The project is still, I never get to say this, the project is still below the initial estimate. It feels good. But either way, we just wanted to make you all aware this is a bit of an unusual tip amendment that would help with work that was done in 2021 and 2022. And the other thing, as Hannah noted, is A10A project. That's a big project. That's a project that's been on the books since 2014. And the action being taken with the tip and stip changes that from a project that is and has been committed and essentially changes the status of that project. A small section will remain funded near the new Stock Road interchange, but for the most part, the widening of Future 26 will have to recompete for future funding in order to move forward.
Also, I'll brought it to our attention, we need to vote on the minutes and the consent.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. I skipped right over that one. Okay. So we'll go back to item 3A first, is to approve the agenda and the consent. Thank you, Jill. Thank you for handling the meeting last time. I really appreciate that. We have a first. Do we have a second? Second. Okay. Thank you.
Asheville, Kim Roney.
Before I vote, I have a quick clarification. Are we discussing this STIP, the STIP, later on in the agenda, and that's not part of this consent agenda, even though we had that conversation just now?
Exactly. We'll have to have another motion after this.
Thank you so much. Aye.
Biltmore Forest, Drew Stevens.
Present.
DOT Division 14, Chuck McGrady.
Present.
Canton, Dr. Ralph Hamlet.
Aye.
Fletcher, Jim Clare.
Aye.
Haywood County, Brandon Rogers. Hendersonville, James Hensley. Aye. Laurel Park, George Banta.
Aye.
Mills River, Jeff Moore.
Aye.
Montreat, Tom Widmer.
Aye.
Rural Transit, David White.
Aye.
Urban Transit, Larry Harris.
Aye.
Waynesville, Anthony Sutton.
Aye.
Weaverville, Catherine Cordell. And Woodson, Jim McAllister.
Aye.
Yeah, got it.
Thank you.
This
Sorry
is
about
Kevin
that.
Ansley, Haywood County. Aye.
Yeah, he's there as well. Thank you, Kevin. Sorry, I was getting ahead of trying to move along too fast. Okay, now we'll go back to business, to the amendments for the 2024-2033 Transportation Improvement Program, and we'll reflect what we've already stated.
Right, and just to Kim's question, these are proposed amendments for the existing Transportation Improvement Program. So this is a business item that requires approval from this board. In the information items, we have the draft 2026 through 2035 STIP. A lot of tips and tips flying around, but current one being amended today, information on the future one that was released.
There, by OPM for the $700,000, is there possibility of the consequences of us having to cover that in the reimbursement?
The question that we still have out to NCDOT is whether or not you can reopen a project several years after it's been closed. The amendment being approved today is, the best case scenario, I think, is we have the amendment, the city of Asheville is reimbursed for the work that was done and approved by the MPO previously. But again, we don't know if we approve this amendment, it still may not be possible to have that reimbursed for the city.
To approve the amendment separately then, in case one gets thrown out?
I think it's okay to keep it moving forward as one, and if we find out later that it's not able to be moved, we can remove it. We'll be having more amendments in March.
Personally, I think we do need to approve this. It's in the nature of the spirit of Asheville went ahead and did the work in anticipation of getting it back.
Yes, I do want to say that, this is something where, again, like, we don't want to set a precedent in this. This is, the projects being closed out, and coming back several years later for funding can have serious implications. We made sure before it came to this board that we had not gone ahead with the assumption that those funds had become available and put them on a different project. Had that happened, I can say that the staff recommendation would be different than it is. But from my point of view, that is, the money is there. This is not great in terms of the processes that went through for this project. But the money is there. From our understanding and coordination with MCDOT, it shouldn't impact other projects around the region, such as Clear Creek or Acosta, or Woodfin Greenways. And so from our viewpoint, at least doing this step makes sense at this time.
I think giving some break during that period, as we can all recall, 2020, 2021, things weren't so clear, and we had some difficulties.
Absolutely.
So I think this may be just a one-off, but it's just an anomaly that will never happen again. But giving some break. With that being said, is there any other discussion? I will entertain a motion to approve the amendment. Dr. Campbell, second? Second.
Okay. Asheville, Kim Roney.
Aye.
Biltmore Forest, Drew Stevens.
Aye.
BOT Division 14, Chuck McGrady.
Aye.
Canton, Dr. Ralph Hanlon.
Aye.
Fletcher, Jim Player.
Aye.
Haywood County, Kevin Ensley.
Aye.
Haywood County, Brandon Rogers.
Aye.
Hendersonville, Jennifer Hensley. Aye. Laurel Park, George Banta.
Aye.
Mills River, Jeff Moore.
Aye.
Montreat, Tom Widmer. Rural Transit, David White.
Aye.
Urban Transit, Larry Harris.
Aye.
Waynesville, Anthony Sutton.
Aye.
Weaverville, Catherine Cordell.
Aye.
Woodfin, Jim McAllister.
Aye.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll go on to the safety targets.
That is going to be me. So, We are bringing this item back from last month. And just as a reminder, this is an item that is brought up annually. Just really quick, safety target and performance planning is, I mean, I guess it's not too new anymore, but it really started with requirements that were put in the federal regulations in 2016. And the idea is generally a sound principle. You look at performance measures of how your region's transportation network is doing. You look at your investment capabilities and try to use those investments to achieve targets that you set. In this realm, we are focusing on safety and 5 performance targets that are required as part of the federal planning process. Just some more high-level background. In general, states are required to develop their safety targets. MPOs are given 180 days to either agree to the targets set by the state or to set their own. And something I noted is that, at least as I'm aware, as of right now, no MPO in North Carolina has set their own targets. My understanding, PAMPO, the Raleigh FBO, is considering that. I've not tuned into their meetings, believe it or not. But in general, kind of the thing to point out is that if a region or a state is not achieving its target, then what's required is that state has to spend down all of its safety funds. Not the worst punishment in the world. That's the key thing. The 5 safety targets that we're required to set: roadway fatalities, the fatality rate. That's the number of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled in a region. Serious injuries, serious injury rate. Very similar to fatality rate, except for serious injuries, and non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. We discussed this quite a bit at our last board meeting, and we've discussed this a lot over the last several years. And something that I think has come up persistently is that we are not achieving the targets that are being set by the state within our region. And not only are we not achieving the target, but as you can see in the column next to it, we aren't really doing better than baseline either. So there's a lot of, just to sum up our discussion, and anyone else feel free to jump in, there's been concern about continuing to adopt the state targets and continuing to have them be unachievable. Again, there's the consequences of not achieving the targets. The state has to spend all of their safety funds. Beyond that, there's not much of a consequence. But for you guys today, per the board's request, we did develop 3 alternatives for targets to consider. One is adopting the state's targets. That's the most aggressive target that we are putting on the table. One we're calling the moderate target, which is kind of halfway between the state's target and just maintaining the current trend line. And then the third is just maintaining trend lines, which is the least aggressive of the 3 options. So to note, with roadway fatalities, and all 5 performance measures are going to look pretty similar. But to look at the baseline and the trend, just to note, is based on 5 years of the most recent data. That's 2019 through 23. 24 has not fully become available. Fatalities would be 71.4 with the maintained baseline, 56 with the moderate target, and 40.6 with the state target. Mayor McAllister, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I do. Please, we're talking lives here, dozens of lives. And am I understanding from the previous statements that the state is not willing to have a conversation about A, whether the targets have not been set properly, and B, what can be done to better achieve these targets? Did I misunderstand?
That's a great question. The state's target is based on reducing fatalities to 0 by 2050. That is in the state highway safety plan.
Wait.
And
There's actually someone who thinks we can reduce fatalities to 0.
Is the plan.
Yes.
Okay, all right, just checking.
But I mean, to note, last year when we adopted the state safety target, this board requested that we also communicate to DOT that we wanted to look at more achievable targets. We had that conversation, and one of the things that was noted by NCDOT was, you guys have a safety plan that we're going to hear about in a little bit. That would be a great place to have that conversation and look at really what does the region want to set and kind of have that in a very comprehensive way. Not to take down my own work, very proud of these dotted lines, but these are, fairly simplified looks at trends and existing trends. Does that get to your question, Mayor McAllister?
It does, and I appreciate your graphic representation. That helps. Thank you.
On the maintained trend line for fatalities, how did that number get so 71.4?
That's based on the 5-year trends between 2019 and 2023.
But it doesn't seem like it's jumped that much, though.
No, when you look at it compared to 2019 and some of the earlier years, that's a considerable jump. 46 in both 19 and 20 to 71.4 5 years later. That's
part of swing is anomaly, because we have a lot less traffic on the road in 2021. That's why you see that increase in 2023 when everyone started getting back on the road.
No, that's great. But I mean, just to note, with these targets, what you'll see in general is the maintained trend lines. We're looking at more than we've had in the past. The moderate target, that is basically going back to a number we saw several years before, and the DOT target is again very aggressive. So this would be the fatalities with the 3 different alternatives. Fatality rate, serious injuries, serious injury rates, and non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. To note, the TCC, we had a conversation about this. Their recommendation was to adopt the state targets. And I think the thing that they mentioned is that, the consequences of not meeting the targets in a lot of ways is a good thing. Spend down your safety money. And the other thing is that they noted is that maintaining an aggressive stance on safety and trying to push to do more with safety is something that we should be trying to achieve. But this is something that we are required, we have a deadline of February 27th to set our annual target. So we are looking for board approval on one of these 3 targets today.
Could I ask you to elaborate a little bit on the consequences? Who's spending down their money, their safety money?
So NCDOT receives a ton of funding, the Highway Safety Improvement Program. That's funding that comes to the state and is specifically for safety improvement projects. It's not a ton of money, but the state is currently, they are, and DOT folks, feel free to jump in, but in general, they are very aggressively spending their funding down. It's a bit of a separate program with its own restrictions, but they are spending down their funds.
And how does our motion to set or change or go with theirs affect those costs?
I would say in general, it most likely would not. They're going to maintain their state target, one way or the other. And so they have their own target that they are required to report directly to federal highways. I will just note that in the past, when we've talked about alternative targets, I have nearly pleaded this board to not adopt those because the reporting requirements are not light. I've been told that, and if we adopt alternative safety targets, the DOT safety unit would be willing to assist us in those reporting requirements and take that a lot of the burden off of us.
Any other questions? Yeah. Oh.
Yes. Can you give us a quick reasoning for the TCC's recommendation on the more aggressive targets when we haven't even been hitting what we've been setting in the past?
Sure. I'll give you. I mean, their recommendation was largely that setting aggressive safety targets is a good thing. Communicating that we want to be aggressive on safety is something that they felt was important, and that the consequences of failure in communicating that we want to be aggressive are, again, not horrible. One thing I did want to kind of bring up, because we did talk about it a little bit, is all of the crashes that don't necessarily have to do with the infrastructure that's out there. You know, whether that's distracted driving, drunk driving, or any of those. The other thing I'd point out is that there's, on the flip side, there's also a lot of technological advances that are going on with automobiles that are improving safety. My car certainly doesn't have it. I still have my CD player, but you know, there are cars that have additional detection systems, and there are a lot of things like that that aren't necessarily in the control of infrastructure, but are making safety improvements.
Kristen, we're not seeing that in the actual results. You know, the whole idea of setting smart goals is to have goals that are achievable, and setting goals based on what looks good versus what's achievable are two infinitely different things here.
That's a fair point.
If we were not to establish any goals, what is the punishment for the MPO?
That's a great question. I always do my homework, Jeff, so I've never considered not doing it. But I would have to inquire on that. We have to set a date.
Yeah. I thought the state goals then just automatically comes after 60 days.
I mean, the state has set their goals or their targets, but I think we are still required to officially adopt them.
I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, if somebody from the outside came in here and watched this process, you just sit there and go, what is this? Is this something George Orwell put in place in the Department of Transportation somewhere? We're being asked to do something that makes absolutely no sense. In my opinion. We spend a massive amount of time on something that part of me goes, just vote yes and get it over with, so we don't have this conversation again. And then another thing wants, and I don't usually blow things up, but I sort of want to blow this one up. And it'll probably blow up back in Raleigh on another table that I'm sitting behind. I don't know. No one from DOT, Tim, do you have any perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes, and I remember the conversation last year, I think Kim actually put a caveat in there about encouraging more education, because a lot of this comes back to the distracted driving, the unbelted folks driving, drinking driving.
Things that we can't control.
Right, but, thinking of it from another perspective, if you adopt these, we're not gonna meet the target, which means we have to spend our safety money. We're gonna spend our safety money anyway. Every year we burn our HSIP money on, down to the ground, on great stuff. Lots of striping, lots of reflectors, lots of speed studies. That's one of the big things we do now, because statutory 55 was a great idea, and then never. And now that we have a whole lot of cars out there and a whole lot of cars that can kind of keep themselves in the road, it's even worse. So, we're going back through and working through our region, setting responsible speed limits that don't have anything to do with 85th percentile. It has to do with what is a reasonable pace on the roadway, based on side friction, as far as like driveways and curves and, topography, all those things. So there are ample opportunities for us to spend that safety money every year. We're going to. The other piece of it is, if you set a goal, ours is Vision Zero. So, we would like to see zero. It's an aspirational goal, and you have to think of it that way. We know that there are things that are outside of our control that will happen, most likely, if someone, unfortunately may lose their life. But the flip of it would be to say, by 2050, we're okay with having half as many people die. It feels a lot easier to say we want nobody dying than to say we're okay with half of them dying. So, personally, I say you adopt this, we keep moving, we keep doing safety projects as fast as we can put them out. And we don't spend a whole lot more time beating ourselves up over this, but, because there's no good, what good target is there when it comes to fatalities, besides none? Even though we know it's going to be very unlikely that we get there.
Well, appreciate your response, and that makes a lot of sense. I would either go there for the reasons you stated, or I'd take the alternative and just vote the whole damn thing down and don't do a damn thing and see what happens. And then if Tristan comes back to this member and says, this is wasting all my time, at the next MPO meeting, I would move a motion to reconsider the issue, just because the pain that is being caused by our staff who have better things to do. But this just makes no sense. I really feel like I'm in some sort of Orwellian science world or science fiction with this thing. And I'm on the damn board. I don't know. Those are the other thought was just walk out of the room and just ignore the whole damn thing.
I think that's what continues to happen, though, is that you come in and then you vote on it because that's what you've always done, then nothing changes. And really, setting goals, you should be setting attainable goals. To me, if you're setting an unobtainable goal, then that's irrational, and it's something that you'll never know, you know that you can't achieve anyway. And so if we set attainable goals, and what if we actually hit them? Like, how great is that for our community that we're actually setting goals and reaching those? So I kind of agree with you. Not kind of, but I do.
Any other comments?
Well, we can beat a dead horse.
Yes.
To significantly reduced. That is a realistic number that you can look at, you can weigh. So the way it was last year, significantly reduced it. Zero is, well, it would be significant, but it's foolish. And it is just a waste of time. Frankly, I just don't feel like participating in a
I couldn't quite hear those comments, but it was similar to Chuck's. So I agree with all these comments, but I would make a motion that we accept the state standards.
And I'll second it.
Question before.
We'll put that on the floor.
Got to throw this out. Well, every fatality is investigated and a cause is determined. And we all know there's some things we can't really do anything about. It's not a deficiency of the roadway, something that can be addressed with a project or funding, et cetera. Sometimes it's something that distracted driving or whatever. I wonder if there's a way to look at these rates and understand that some of these things, they contribute to the rate as we see it now. I know it might be a lot more work or something, but it can measure it in something that we can affect and say, well, in this case, it was a roadway deficiency. That's where we can target on bringing that down. I don't know, is there a way to bring down distracted driving other than enforcement? Is there a way to bring down drunk driving other than enforcement? Is there a thing you can do? Yeah, I know that there have been a lot of projects that have saved a lot of lives, such as the center line or the median guardrail and things like that. But just throwing that out.
DOT's job to spend all that safety money.
Right, but that's a great point. The next item, and we'll have Lauren Blackburn presenting on that, is either way our safety plan is going to discuss these targets in more depth than we're talking about today. And something we have talked about is, can we start to dig into what are really what are the numbers that we can intervene with, and what are the ones that are going to be much harder to hit?
Going back, Mr. Harris made a motion, Mr. McGree second to adopt the state's targets. Okay?
Can I make an additional motion?
Yes.
I'd like to adopt the second option, which was
Moderate.
moderate. Yes.
Do we have a second for the?
Point of order, when there's a motion and a second on the table, it's my understanding that that vote has to be completed before a second motion can be made, unless the motioner accepts an amendment.
That's true.
Or withdraws their motion.
Mr. Harris or Mr. McGree?
I would like to go ahead and vote on this motion to see what we like.
And the first motion stands, so let's do that motion first.
And could you restate the motion, please?
Yes, the motion is to accept the state's targets, which is the most aggressive target at reducing fatalities and serious injuries.
Thank you.
Asheville, Kim Roney.
Aye.
Biltmore Forest, Drew Stevens.
Aye.
BOT Division 14, Chuck McGrady.
No.
Kansas, Dr. Ralph Hammett. Fletcher, Jim Slayer.
No.
Haywood County, Kevin Endley.
No.
Haywood County, Brandon Rogers.
No.
Hendersonville, Jennifer Hensley. No. Laurel Park, George Banta.
No.
Mills River, Jeff Moore.
No.
Montreat, Tom Whitmer.
No.
Rural Transit, David White.
No.
Urban Transit, Larry Harris.
Aye.
Waynesville, Anthony Sutton.
No.
Weaverville, Catherine Cordell. Woodfin, Jim McAllister.
No.
The motion fails.
Councilmember Cordell, was that a aye or an A? We couldn't quite hear you.
No. Okay. The motion fails. I would be open to an additional motion.
So I would like to make the motion that we adopt a moderate target this year.
We have a motion to adopt the moderate target, which is a target halfway between the state target and the current trend. Do we have a second?
Point of order?
Yes.
Regardless of what happens on this motion, would the chair be amenable to a motion to, instead of adopting a target, to go back to the state and tell them we're not willing to adopt any targets until we have a real discussion about
the point would be if this motion fails to get a second, then there could be another motion to do just that.
Well, I would amend that motion if nobody's going to second my motion.
Okay.
Okay. So then I amend my motion to go back to the state, and we are not adopting any target until we have further discussion.
So we have a motion on the table to adopt.
I will second that.
In second.
I have a friendly amendment. This is Kim from the city of Asheville, but also it's my understanding that Parker Sloan from the county commission, Buncombe County Commission, is on the call and not being called in the roll call.
Okay. He's not in the meeting.
Is he Zoom user?
He may be misnamed on his device. Is he a Zoom user?
Oh, yes, that's him.
That's him. So thank you, Kim. He was not named on his device, so we were not aware. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll my friendly amendment is very similar to last year, because what I seem to be seeing as a trend in almost 10 years of watching these meetings, and now my 5th year at this table, is that once a year we receive this requirement from the state, and then we either adopt the state's targets or we don't. But regardless, each meeting we make decisions on whether or not our roads are going to be designed safely. So the amendment I would suggest is that if we're going to be making this motion instead of adopting the state's, that we include state funding and support to meet the target with design speed elements.
There was a motion on the table not to adopt any standards. So are you suggesting amending that to say that we would spend all the money?
I didn't fully understand what you were saying. I couldn't hear the end of it,
Yes.
and I couldn't.
We couldn't really hear the end of your statement.
Sure, I'll restate my amendment. Because the motion is to not accept targets, that we explicitly include that we need state funding and support to meet the targets, not just to adopt them.
Kim, wouldn't that be part of the motion success to include that in a discussion with NCDOT?
Yes, that is the intention of my putting it into the public record. If it is not accepted by the motioner or the second, then my friendly amendment would fail.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer, since we haven't gotten a second, you can amend your...
Oh, you do? I seconded it. Pardon me.
Second. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
This other party wants to amend.
I mean, I feel like it was in there when I said that we would be willing to not accept any target, but then also work with NCDOT on the reasoning why we're not accepting it, which I think was open further discussion.
Absolutely.
So then I think I'd like to just keep it remaining.
Okay, perfect. So we have, does that help, Kim?
I understand that my amendment is not accepted, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. So we have a first and a second not to adopt any standards.
Okay. Asheville, Kim Rooney.
No.
Biltmore Forest, Drew Stevens.
Present.
DOT Division 14.
Aye.
Stanton, Dr. Ralph Hamlet. Fletcher, Jim Player.
Aye.
Haywood County, Kevin Ensley.
Well, I'm a little bit confused, but I'm going to vote no. So,
I appreciate your honesty.
Haywood County, Brandon Rogers.
No.
Hendersonville, Jennifer Hensley.
Aye.
Laurel Park, George Banta.
no.
Mills River, Jeff Moore.
Aye.
Von Treat, Tom Whitmer. Rural Transit, David White.
Aye.
Urban Transit, Larry Harris.
No.
Waynesville, Anthony Sutton.
How many more votes do we have? 2. Myself and the next person.
Two more after.
2 more after you.
We're looking at the total.
Weaverville, Catherine Cordell.
Aye.
Woodfin, Jim McAllister.
Aye.
I will go aye.
And this is Parker Sloan. I'll say aye as well.
He's here, but I
So
didn't
the totals are 10 to
Oh, I'm
5.
sorry.
And 5,
10 to 5.
we will not set targets and indicate that we would like to have more of a discussion before setting targets at a later date.
I appreciate everyone participating in that. It's a little concerning, but I think it's warranted. So thank you, everyone. We will see what happens. We've put ourselves out there now to be the first.
There we go.
That concludes the business portion of our meeting. So now we'll go to informational items. So the Safe Streets for Western North Carolina Plan update.
Yeah, so with us today is Lauren Blackburn with VHB. She's heading up our Safe Streets for Western North Carolina plan that's funded through the USDOT Safe Streets for All plan. That's a discretionary grant that the MPO and the Sky RPO received last year. So a lot of work has been going on kind of in the background for this plan. This is an important safety plan for the region. So Lauren, please take it away.
All right, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay, very good. All right, well, I was listening intently to your discussion just now and writing some notes, but I'm glad you all are as engaged on this topic, and I think it's really important, of course. So I'm providing an update on the safety plan that we're developing with the MPO, just also to note that the Land of Sky RPO is also a partner in this, and NCDOT is providing strong support from a technical advisory role. The things I'm going to try to cover here very quickly is a quick recap of the process and the progress to date. I'm going to summarize a few of the key analysis findings from our crash data and other risk analysis work that we've been doing. And I'm also going to touch on what we had done from a public engagement standpoint and what we're going to prepare for in the spring for ongoing engagement. And then just talk a little bit more about some of our next steps. So from a recap, just to recover or revisit some of the process that we follow as part of safety planning, very similar to a lot of other transportation planning work. We've identified and established our partners. A lot of those I just mentioned earlier, but also local governments are part of this process. We have a technical steering committee, which involves some of your member jurisdictions on that technical steering committee. We've also done a whole lot of safety analysis, which I'll cover some of that today. And we've identified what we call emphasis areas. Some of you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the target setting that the state has a safety plan as well called the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. They also identify what are called emphasis areas. And so we're purposely aligning with those organizational elements, but also looking at some other ways of identifying certain crash types or problems that we want to focus on. And now we're at the stage where we're identifying some strategies and the project types, and then we'll start moving towards implementation planning and some performance measures for how the plan can be tracked moving forward. A lot going on here, but I just want to give an overarching review of the schedule. We're in early part 2025, of course, which means that, as mentioned earlier, we've finalized a lot of the safety analysis work. We had done some of the engagement work, but due to, of course, Helene and other issues, we've postponed a lot of the engagement, and now we're looking at some other options for how we can do that in the spring. I'll talk about that in just a minute. We've also looked at some of the considerations for equity and other socioeconomic approaches, and we've also looked at some initial countermeasure approaches, the types of tools that could best address some of these problems. The main thing I want to stress here is that the plan is shooting for an August adoption. So I definitely anticipate we'll be back meeting with you all probably in the early summer to give you a briefing on what the draft plan looks like, and then coming back in August for an adoption. All right, to dig into some of the overarching kind of organization of this plan. As you all were just talking about your safety target setting approaches, it is related to this work, but it's also a different activity. So as you all discussed, FHWA requires that every MPO adopt those safety targets. The safety planning process also requires that we set goals, but those goals are more aspirational, long-term, and then for each goal, there's going to be a set of strategies and countermeasures and actions that support it. As you all just discussed, there's lots of options for how you set targets. And, so for now, there's been the traditional method of adopting the state targets provided to the MPOs, but there are many other methods, many of which you all just discussed. And so we will continue to work with the MPO to identify some alternatives that you all could look at moving forward. From a safety planning perspective and the goal that we would want to set, again, this is longer term, aspirational, and it's in a way, it's more of describing your vision for how you want to describe your outcomes for safety in the region in the next 20 or 30 years. Very similar to this state plan, which has identified their goal of setting a zero by 2050. So a couple of the options that we'll be looking at, we haven't set a goal for this plan yet, but we're continuing to work with the MPO on this, is either we can set a goal by setting a year by which you would like to move towards a zero by that year. Another option could be looking at a rate at reducing those fatal and serious injury crashes by a certain year or horizon. And either of these are perfectly acceptable. But again, the whole purpose here is really just to describe an overall vision for how the region wants to set safety planning goals in the future. All right, just a couple highlights from some of the safety analysis work. And you all were discussing some of this earlier, is, what are the types of crashes or safety problems that we see as being most problematic? Where could you really make the biggest difference? If you can identify strategies to address these problems, then, how could that really drive those numbers down the most quickly? So on the left, I've identified some of the crash types that are higher or disproportionately higher in your region compared to statewide averages, and those would include bicyclist crashes in at least a few of the counties, especially Buncombe. Lane departure is in some cases, like Buncombe County, it's a little lower than the state average, but in most of the other counties, it's higher than the state average. That's pretty typical for more rural counties. Motorcycle crashes, similarly, are higher, but in every county, and that could have a lot to do with just the amount of motorcycling traffic you have in the region. Older driver crashes are also overrepresented in all of the counties in this region compared to the state. And one thing I'll just mention, that's not just compared to the state, but also proportionate to how many what your population looks like. So it's also looking at do we have more people dying and being seriously injured who we would identify as an older driver, which is typically 65 and above, compared to your population share. Seat belts and car seats. It is similar to the statewide average, but there's a couple counties where we need to pay attention to this really serious problem. And speed. A couple of y'all have talked about that earlier. There are some counties where speed-related crashes and fatal and serious injury crashes are higher as a percentage of the total compared to the statewide average. On the right-hand side, it's telling a similar story: lane departure, seat belts and car seat usage, motorcycle-related crashes, speed, pedestrian crashes. That dark bar graph that towers over its kind of counterpart, if you see that dark bar, towering over that sort of teal color, that's telling us that when those crashes occur, they're more likely to result in a fatal and serious injury outcome. So those are really some of the types of crashes we want to pay a lot more attention to. Again, lane departure, seatbelt related crashes, motorcycle impairment, speed related pedestrian and bicyclist crashes. So as far as where these crashes are occurring, about 76% of your fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring in rural areas. That's probably not a surprise considering most of your region is rural. About 53% of all the crashes and 67% of your bike and ped crashes, all types, all injuries, are occurring in urban areas. So for bike and ped crashes, we do see more of them occurring in urban areas, and that's not, again, surprising. About half of the fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring on 2-lane undivided roads. Probably not surprising either, considering, again, your region as a whole. But I think a couple things that are just really kind of standing out to us: about a third of the fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring on U.S. routes, which only account for about 3% of your total mileage. So there's definitely a big disparity there. And about 40% of pedestrian fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring on multi-lane roads. Those would typically be 4- and 5-lane roads, typically undivided. And so for pedestrian-related crashes, that's different than a lot of the other crash types. So it does tell us that pedestrian crashes, especially those fatal and serious injury crashes, are most problematic when they're occurring on those multi-lane roads. That is just a fraction of a whole lot of data analysis that we've done for the region, but also some key highlights. Okay, some other things we've done. One thing is developing what's called a high injury network. It's a map that this is a screenshot of this. Tristan and the team has an online mapping tool that you can drill in, you can zoom in, and it's got a lot of other layers in it as well. But essentially what we've done here is we created a map showing all of the segments and intersections that fall into the top 3% of all of the sections and top 1% of intersections based on crash frequency and crash severity. So that there's a explanation on the right-hand side that's based on the outcomes, the severity. So essentially, if it's a red line on this map, that's telling us that that's a location where most of those serious injury and fatal crashes have occurred. And we developed a similar set of maps just for bike and ped crashes, looking again at the frequency and severity of those crashes on the top 1 to 5%, and the same for intersections. So here's just a zoomed in version looking at the Hendersonville area and just a couple of key statistics about that. So again, 3% of the network, and that represents about 76% of those fatal and serious injury crashes. The acronym KA stands for fatal and serious injury crashes. So it's still a lot of mileage, and this is just one indicator that there may be a problem. And then similarly, like I mentioned, we have an intersection-related analysis of those crashes and the frequency and severity. Most often these intersections are popping up in the urban areas, but we certainly see them at some of your busier rural intersections as well. Okay. The crash analysis and the high injury network only tell us so much. It tells us that there have been some problems in the past. But one of the things that we see with those high injury networks and a lot of the historic facing data is that it can only tell us that something did happen, but it doesn't give us a lot of insights about whether there is a serious risk for a future problem. So it's really important that we understand the risks to pair that with where we've got some of those historic problems. And so what we've done here is we've identified 3 key elements. One measure of exposure, which is really just a measure of how many vehicles and a mixture of pedestrians and bicyclists are expected at a place. We've also developed some analysis tools to describe what we call likelihood based on several key crash types, and then also a tool to help us understand the severity of a crash that may occur, and that's a direct relationship back to the speed. So we've pulled in probe data from vehicle and mobile phone data to help describe where those speeds are highest, and then we look at that in context and have a better understanding about if it is matching the context. And then all of these things together are helping us paint a better picture about where we expect the risk to be highest. So this is a layered, and it's kind of hard to tell what's going on the map on the right side, but essentially what we're showing here is that we've developed 7 layers, each describing the probability that a certain crash type may occur on a road segment. I know the map is kind of hard to read at this scale, but again, that's in that online mapping tool. And this is just going to be a really important resource as you move forward. So once you've identified a place, maybe on the high injury network that you want to look at, this is giving us more insights about what the specific problems may be, whether or not a crash has historically occurred there. So just to zoom in on a more specific example, again, this is zoomed in on Hendersonville area, and this is looking at bicyclist crash risk in particular. One thing to mention here, went through a fairly robust statistical modeling exercise. So this is pulling in a lot of characteristics about the roadway and the context, analyzing the whole system to identify those highest probability locations. And so in this location, or North Main, identifies as a high crash risk for bicyclists. Speed is in the sort of moderate to higher than moderate kind of parameters. And then North Main, at least according to this analysis, is telling us that it's a medium to high level of vehicle volumes as well as other users. The point here is bringing all of this together tells us a little bit more about a place that we might need to look at further and investigate further. So that's just sort of a sampling of a lot of the data analysis work that's been done so far. And the point of that, again, is to identify problems that we want to investigate further and help us narrow down some of the safety problems to be able to articulate what types of countermeasures and strategies could apply to a location. So next part of this was the socioeconomic analysis work. And the reason we did this is to help us just better understand what portions of your population are being most adversely impacted by some of these crashes. So this is all coming from crash data. The crash reports that law enforcement submit does include information about the race, the age, the gender of the persons involved in the crashes. And so we've compared that to statewide rates and other measures. A couple things just to point out here. As a measure of population, so a fatal and serious injury crash rate is the number of fatal and serious injury crashes happening by 1,000 population. So Haywood County's population, of course, as you all know, has a lower population as a whole, but as a crash rate, certain populations are showing up as having a much higher crash rate compared to the statewide average. For Haywood County, that shows up predominantly in the Black and the Native American populations. By age groups, we see for younger drivers or younger roadway users between that age 15 to 24, that may be an age group we really want to pay attention to in particular, and they're showing up most especially in Haywood and Transylvania County. A lot going on this table, but just a couple things I want to bring out here is we didn't just look at the crash rates, but we also examined the crash types and what populations may be most impacted within those crash types. So a couple of key findings here is the Black population is most overrepresented in those fatal and crash rates, especially for all the crash types. But there are certain crash types where they're really very disproportionate. Income seems to be a good indicator of where these types of crashes are occurring or the populations are being most impacted. So an area that has a low household income is where we see a higher concentration of the fatal and serious injury crashes. And then like I mentioned earlier, the older driver or older population, they're a fast-growing part of your population, as you all know, but they're also showing up as an overrepresentation in compared to all the age groups as well for a lot of the crash types. Seems like it's happening a lot at intersections when there's left turns involved. So just a couple of key insights from just looking at it from the persons involved in these crashes and who's being disproportionately impacted. Okay, now just a quick recap of the engagement work.
Lauren?
Yes. Heard a question.
Oh, do you have a question?
Yes, could you go back one slide, Lauren? When we look at the causes, where does distractions such as iPhone usage, texting fall in that emphasis area?
Great question. One thing I'll just quickly highlight. I don't have that graph in here. We've got lots of graphs and charts. Two answers. One is we don't have great data about distraction. As you may know, our state law has a fairly narrow definition of what distraction means. And so when, again, thinking about this from the crash reporting standpoint, if we're using that as a source to describe distraction, and the law enforcement has to follow the law, which I believe basically comes down to whether or not the person was actively typing on their phone while they're driving or otherwise traveling. So we don't have great data about actual distraction rates. So that's one reason why it's not showing up here as an emphasis area, but it's also a causal factor behind a lot of other things that we can drill further into some of these and see when distraction was a sort of sub-factor in a lot of this, but it's, I guess the best way I know to answer your question is we do have some information about distraction, but we don't have a lot of confidence in the data itself to be able to understand how big of a problem it really is.
Thank you. I would imagine that lane departure would be one of those factors that you were talking about.
Absolutely. Can be for several of these, yes. Okay. All right. So just to quickly recap the engagement part of it, last June, we held a leadership summit. Several representatives from local regional agencies and different disciplines, law enforcement, EMS were encouraged or invited and participated in that event. And during that event, we listened to what they identified as some of the safety problems that their communities have experienced. So some things we learned from that event were that there were some challenges or concerns about the consistency of data. You know, how are we, similar to the question you just asked about distraction, do we have good confidence in the data to help us tell us all the problems? There was a lot of discussion about funding for implementation. Do we have enough? Are there other funding sources? A lot of discussion about human behaviors and choices, how that influences some of those outcomes. Some ideas about how we could do better to communicate and form new policies around building better and safer streets, as well as how different activities can just translate better into more safe outcomes. Some discussion about leadership priorities. So it's here, I think the discussion was more about what the local and regional agencies are, how they're prioritizing policy, funding plans, projects to really line up with safety. And then a lot of discussion about public education, what we could do better to help educate the public about some of these problems and how they can respond better. Some other engagement work that was planned before September 2024. We're still doing a lot of this, but there's going to be some changes. I'll touch on those in just a second. We've got a technical steering committee, as I mentioned. We've had 2 of the 3 meetings. We have another leadership summit planned for probably this coming summer. We do have a project brand and a website, and I'll talk about some of the materials there. We've conducted some focus groups, but we've had to shift the plans a bit there, primarily as a result of Helene, and of course the engagement events that were planned for late September, early October were shifted, and now we're thinking about pivoting towards more of a virtual series of events in the next few months. So we're continuing to review our options for planning, and especially in how that lines up with the MPO's Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So as I mentioned, we're pivoting on some of the engagement. We've got, we're moving towards more of a virtual platform. And there, we do also have a survey that I'll mention in just a minute about how we can learn more from the public. So we had a series of focus groups. We were able to have 3 of those back in August, and we met with representatives of law enforcement, emergency services, learned a lot about what we call post-crash care. How are they able to respond to the event of a crash to reduce the likelihood of that resulting in a fatality? We also met with a whole host of representatives in public education, driver's ed, and others who work with on that sort of like people-based approach about some of the ideas that may have. And then we also met with a large number of people who work in planning, transportation engineering, public works about some of their ideas about developing and building better infrastructure. We had planned for having a 4th focus group, but we paused that, and now we're going to have a couple different webinars in March, more than likely. So be on the lookout for some announcements about that to help us spread the word, to learn more from others who want to give us some feedback. So I mentioned we have a website. It's on the MPO website. I encourage you to look for that. I think it's under the planning tab for the MPO website. And there you'll find a few, I hope you would find them interesting resources, and feel free to share that with your colleagues and neighbors. One is a storyboard, which communicates some of the problems I was just explaining earlier about, for example, what types of roads where pedestrians or bicyclists or lane departure is happening on the most, and then also a countermeasure glossary, just to help provide some better education about what are these tools that we can implement, especially education or engineering tools, but there's also some educational tools in there. So that'd be one thing I would encourage you to check out. And I mentioned earlier a survey. The survey link is live on the website. It can be shared now, but we are going to promote the survey, some of those webinars coming up, and then there will be some emails coming out from our project team members at McAdams to really kind of get the word out about this survey, ask some good questions about what people experience as far as roadway safety problems and some of the perceptions they have about countermeasures. For each of the counties included in the study area, we have a fact sheet, which provides some just high-level summary information about crashes, fatal and serious injury crashes, and just some of the key results of that review, and then what we can all do to help improve safety in the region. So these are just examples from Haywood and Henderson County, but all 5 county sheets or posters are on the website as well. So our next steps are to promote the work that's on the website, hopefully have some of those virtual engagement opportunities in the spring, may also look to piggyback with the MTP. And then we'll summarize the themes from what we learned from this additional outreach and formulate some final goals for the plan, develop more actionable strategies, and then have a technical steering committee and a leadership summit, hopefully in the June horizon. And I think that's all I got. Any questions?
Councilmember Rumney, you have your hand raised.
I do. Lauren, thank you for this presentation. In a lot of ways, I wish that we had received this data before we voted on our safety targets, because I think data can help to inform our targets and goals at the same time. I'm deeply concerned because when I participated in the vehicle miles reduction task force through the Governor Cooper's office a couple years ago, a lot of the smaller cities and rural areas of North Carolina don't have the budget to do like the engineering part of this work that you're talking about to make our roads safer by design. And so that was one of the big things that constantly was coming up is like the state is going to ask us to meet targets and then not show up for the funding. And a lot of it also comes from the maintenance. It's like you can install this crosswalk, you can make this road more ADA accessible, but then you have to maintain it. So I think that's one of the struggles that's coming up for me and for people across North Carolina in elected office is we want to make our roads safer, but we need the funding. And I'm always hearing that these kinds of studies are supposed to help us leverage the funding, and then the funding doesn't come. So I'm just holding on to those, the duality of this. Like, I do want us to have safer roads, and I do want us to study if the leverage results in more funding. But I also understand how hard it is to meet the targets if it's not a reality.
Thank you.
Very well said. Any other comments, questions? Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just, I mean, I think just about, or a large portion of this board is on the leadership summit, is that correct? So when the next one gets scheduled, I really would recommend that folks try to show up if you can. Well, one of the things that Lauren touched on that's very wonky, the safety risk, a huge, massive, awesome improvement for our planning processes. I can't say that enough. Right now, a lot of planning for safety is where there are a bunch of crashes. There is much harder to get into is the intervention matching with the crashes that we're seeing. So the work that Lauren has been and her team have been working on, I'm planning on applying it to everything. So please tune in if you can. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Next is the I-26 connector optimization and refinement. This has been brought to the MPO once or twice over the last 36 years. Today we have Nathan Moneyham with Division 13 at NCDOT to talk about the I-26 connector. Just as a reminder, Nathan came and presented in August of last year to talk about the kickoff of the optimization and refinement. That is a new process for DOT that came out of the bids that were received for the I-26 connector that were $400 to $500 million, and I think above the estimated cost. So over the last 6 months or so, the division's been working on refining the project to help reduce costs and keep the project moving forward. So Nathan, please take it away.
You want to click through for me, or?
I'm your clicker.
Okay. Go ahead. So I'm going to back up. Appreciate that introduction, Tristan, and back up a little bit just to kind of give a timeline of what's happened over the past really several years with the connector project. Obviously, we began procurement of this project in January of 2023, and that involved us shortlisting 3 competing design-build teams. It's a very highly confidential procurement process that ultimately ends in teams submitting technical proposals as well as price proposals at the end of that time. Go ahead, Tristan. To cover just some bases of those, what's involved in that process, again, not specific to I-2513, but to all design builds. In the procurement process, shortlisted teams are allowed a limited number of alternative technical concepts. And in those, they can propose alternative plans that differ from the procurement documents, which ultimately include the preliminary design. NCDOT either rejects or approves those ATC proposals. That approval process does not approve any specific design details. It simply allows the design build team to incorporate that concept into their technical proposal and plans at the time of bid if they so choose. The whole purpose of that process is to promote innovation in the procurement phase of a project, and it's really critical to the design build program for NCDOT. Go ahead, Tristan. So ATCs are highly confidential due to the competitive nature of design build procurement. We've got 3 teams competing specifically on their ideas, their proprietary concepts and plans. So by policy, that process is confidential even within the department. And that in turn does restrict the involvement of local stakeholders during that phase of procurement. At the end of all that process, the design build project is awarded based off a best value award that considers a combination of the technical score given to that design build team's technical plans and proposal in combination with their bid. And NCDOT approved ATCs that a design build team elects to include in their final technical proposal and plans, those are accounted for in the technical score. Go ahead, Tristan. So that process takes place, and from January 2023 to February of 2024, that's what was going on. We were working with all 3 of those teams towards a bid opening. And in February of 2024, bids were open, and they all exceeded the allowable range of the engineer's estimate and the overall funding for the project significantly, as Tristan has implied. And because of that, we did not make an award. In the following months, the department developed a new program, a new process to include in our best and final offer, or basically attempt to relet the project, and we coined that optimization and refinement. And it's a process that required our design build teams to submit a proposal for ways to further optimize and refine the project and ultimately reduce costs post-award. After that process was put in place, the teams incorporated that into their BAFO technical proposals and their bids, and we had our final bid opening in May of 2024. You can see the bids there. Archer Wright joint venture was the low bid at $1.147 billion. Again, the note here to remember is that these are not bids based off the 2018 plans that were presented. These are specific plans and proposals specific to each contractor that they developed over the 13-month procurement period. So with that project award, this is the associated plan that was submitted in May of 2024 by Archer Wright joint venture. There are key differences from the 2018 plans and that are public, including significant changes to the profile of the bridges across the French Fork River. They've been significantly reduced. They've removed all of the design exceptions from the 2018 plans, and then most significantly, it did change the configuration of the I-26 and Patton Avenue interchange into a I-26 over Patton Avenue. Go ahead and click, Tristan. So that is the most notable change associated with the Archer Wright's winning bid plans. We understand that there is a long-standing local desire in many previous conversations about I-26 for it to pass under Patton Avenue. That was agreed to be reflected in the 2018 preliminary designs. And the change of the design to I-26 over Patton Avenue was submitted as an ATC by Archer Wright joint venture in the procurement process, ultimately in June of 2023. So this type of over-under evaluation at an interchange is pretty typical of the design build process across the state. It's something that design build teams generally do evaluate. And as a part of their ATC proposal, Archer Wright joint venture included the visualizations of the proposed bridge as required by our initial approval of the ATC. I also note this plan sheet you see in the picture is the bid award plans. When we get into O&R and talk about the reductions we've made, the size, both width and length of that bridge was reduced in the O&R process. Go click through. The next couple of slides are visualizations. Here's just an idea of what was submitted with their bid and went into their technical score. You can see the existing condition. This is looking east towards downtown. just go and click through. The next slide is the NCDOT preliminary design with Patton over top of 26. The next slide, same location, I-26 over Patton. Give you a visualization of what that looks like. So again, there's 3 more slides, Tristan, just a little closer view. Again, existing view, still looking east. Again, that's the NCDOT design, I-26 under Patton, and then I-26 over Patton. Give you an idea of the scope, scale, height of that bridge, at least in the original bid plans. Again, that structure has been reduced since O&R began. Go ahead, Tristan. So just a little more background on the specifics of this ATC. Again, Archer Wright Joint Venture elected to incorporate that ATC into their technical proposal that was submitted in April 2024 associated with that low bid of that was opened in May. And that preference and all the discussions in project development for Patton Avenue over I-26 was accounted for, and it did negatively impact the technical score component of the best value award process. So this change was not looked at on favorably in the bid process when it comes to technical score. But ultimately, the cost and schedule savings associated with that change were significant enough to win the project. As we looked at the bid totals earlier, Archer Wright Joint Venture is approximately $200 million less than the next lowest bidder, with this change being the most significant difference between their proposal and the next bidder. That cost difference is really attributed to the reduce in utility conflicts, the reduction of temporary work in construction, and the reduced associated schedule risk with the I-26 over Patton Avenue design. These conflicts are not new. They were known in the discussions that were had prior to procurement, but the significant costs to relocate utilities and face construction were significantly more than previously estimated, as evident by the bids. A couple of things to note. There are no additional impacts due to this change. It is typical of a design-build process that this kind of change is made, and it still does meet the purpose and need, and therefore it does not violate the NEPA guidance and the public involvement that was done prior to procurement. The other key thing I will note is that without this change and the lower bid submitted by Archer Wright Joint Venture, the department would not have been able to move forward with the O&R process. We would have not been able to attempt what we did over the past 6 months because our starting point from a monetary standpoint would have been too high, and ultimately even at that point we would have had to delay the project indefinitely. But because of that bid, because of this change, Archer Wright's Joint Venture's $1.147 billion bid and the associated plans were what set the baseline starting point for the O&R process to begin. So again, from a schedule standpoint, in June of 2024, the O&R process began in earnest. Some principles that we applied during this process, we were able to effectively address certain high-risk proposal elements, transition negotiation those elements into a post-award O&R period that really lets us allow to communicate one-on-one with the design build team, removes a lot of the confidentiality restraints of the regular procurement. We were able, again, because of those confidentiality requirements being removed, we were able to come collaboratively together with NCDOT, the design build team, and local stakeholders to come up with scope reductions and reduce project costs. It also gave us an opportunity to incorporate those innovative design ideas during the O&R period without impacting the best value design build team's design process or their schedule. It gave us some time to do that. There was a significant amount of stakeholder coordination throughout the O&R process with local stakeholders. That included reviewing concepts, providing feedback on those reviews, determining the priorities of local stakeholders when it came to where they would like to see those reductions. And that coordination effort was really critical to the success of the O&R process. And throughout that process, the department, the design build team, and local stakeholders were able to collaboratively determine scope reductions that maintained all the FEIS and ROC commitments to the project. Those include all those commitments to Burton Street and Hillcrest Apartments, maintain the separation of I-26 and Patton Avenue traffic, which has long been a goal of the project, and then also maintain all the pedestrian and cyclist connections that were included in the original design. So Helene, there were Helene impacts on this coordination effort. In the aftermath of Helene, the departments needed focus, and a lot of the local staff and municipalities needed focus shifted to the recovery effort. So some of our meeting schedules and conversations that we had been having were limited. But while the recovery effort was and continues to be our immediate priority, the long-term transportation needs that I-2513 addresses are still critical to Asheville and to Western North Carolina. So as a department, our central staff stepped in, using all that coordination that we had done early in the process and the priorities that were set by the local stakeholders, and continued to work with the design build team to complete the O&R process on schedule. And again, that was really only possible due to the significant coordination effort and communication that we had with local stakeholders to set those priorities. So the results of that O&R process have brought about scope reductions, material changes, and risk mitigations that ultimately resulted in a successful completion of O&R. And the overall savings of that project that have been agreed to are ultimately, from the original bid of 1.147, it's a reduction of about $125 million. Some of the big pieces of that, $63 million in bridge reductions, $26 million in miscellaneous structures, that includes walls and other things, and $24 million in paving, $7 million in earthwork, and many more things that were changed that all add up to that $125 million. And with those savings, the key piece here is that the department is able to move forward with the project on its original schedule, with an expected completion in 2031, which again, with the funding challenges that this project had at bid opening, that is a significant accomplishment. So this is an overall view of the changes from the O&R period. The underlying map here is the original bid proposal. What you see in pink was the reduction that was made during the O&R. So everything that's in pink was a scope reduction, either by width or length, or some change that reduced our scope and impact. The blue is what remains of the O&R design. Go ahead and click through, Tristan. We're going to highlight a couple of these. One significant one that ultimately was not incorporated is Haywood Road. There were early discussions both with the MPO and the stakeholders involved in the O&R process, that one of the ideas and concepts that we were pursuing potentially was a shifting of Haywood Road interchange into the I-2513 AC project, which ultimately amounted to a shifting of a significant portion of project costs from the statewide tier into the regional tier. We investigated that, lots of conversations with the MPO, and ultimately, because of those impacts and the funding constraints and concerns, that idea was shelved and the interchange was retained in the project. You still see in the pink there that we did make some reductions. It's a width, as we have along the entire corridor, to reduce some of the scope impacts. But it was important that this interchange itself remains in I-2513 BD and funded as a statewide tier. Go ahead. So there is a biggest portion of the O&R savings by volume is a reduction of bridge throughout the project. One of the ways that was done was by removing an entire structure from the crossing at the French Broad. You see that on the left here, the bid proposal, the Archie Wright joint venture, their original proposal, included, 5 structures, as you can see. On the right, the post-O&R plans, significantly reduced that, eliminating tire structure and a ramp move. If you'll go to the next slide, Tristan, we'll talk about how that was done. That movement was replaced ultimately by a loop ramp that connects and serves the I-26 eastbound movement to Patton Avenue. Again, that changes, and as with all these changes, they have been modeled and full traffic analysis done, including submitting a modified interchange access report to FHWA. I think the other big thing and benefit to this is that it reduces the right-of-way impacts and the impacts across the river, while the new replacement here ramp is completely contained inside the footprint of the existing interchange. The other thing I'll note here from a structure reduction, you see on the left in the original bid proposal, you see the length and the size of the structure that's over Patton Avenue. Look on the right at O&R, you can see that that structure has been shortened and also narrowed. Go to the next slide. Part of that narrowing really extends to the bridges all the way across the French Broad River. You can see in the original proposal on the left, specifically looking at the eastbound lanes, thank you, Tristan. We had 3 through lanes there. Through significant modeling and traffic analysis efforts throughout the O&R process, we looked at really all aspects of the project for areas that we could reduce. And one of those areas that was identified was this section across the French Broad River and across Patton. You see that an entire through lane has been removed from those bridges, along with shoulder width reductions, ultimately for all the structures across the French Broad River and Patton now to be reduced by an entire through lane. Go ahead. Another big reduction, and this one is one that, again, lots of coordination with the MPO on this, but the original proposal included the replacement of the bridge or bridges there at Broadway, and some resurfacing work and ramp work associated with that interchange. One of the things that we proposed and ultimately accepted as a concept was to delay that work and tie down and use the existing bridges. Really what that does is it pushes this work associated for the interchange into the newly segmented A10 project, which, based off the draft SIP, is unfunded. So it really puts it in a category of it will have to compete for funding in the future to complete this work. The key thing I'll note here too, and this is again with heavy coordination with MPO and stakeholders, the cross-section of Riverside Drive and all those improvements are maintained. No change there, including, it's not reflected here well, but including the connection to the Wilma Diamond extension as well, that will be maintained. So all of the pedestrian and cyclist connections for Riverside Drive will still be made with the project. This is an overview of the east side of the river, and it's probably the area of the project that was most significantly changed through the O&R process. This is an overview of the O&R plans, and there's a lot of specific avenues and areas of change in this that I'm going to highlight individually. Go ahead, Tristan. The first of which is the removal of proposed interchange at 240. This is something that was proposed by stakeholders early in the O&R process that we would evaluate this, and through significant traffic analysis and coordination with FHWA, we were able to get this approved. And it does remove a significant amount of work on an entire structure there with the connection from 240 to Patton here. And it allows us to really improve the grades along this section of roadway, both for Patton and for 240. by disconnecting those. Again, it does change the traffic patterns associated with this, but those have been fully analyzed and coordinated with FHWA as a part of the O&R process.
Nathan, can you expand a little bit on just what exactly the additional pressures are going to be on?
Yeah, so and this is something we've talked about throughout O&R, and at the full view of this picture in a minute, if you want to go back to slide, you might can see it now, Tristan, but part of this, when we talk about removing this interchange, it does include removing the Klingman ramp, which you see off the cul-de-sac down there at the bridge on the bottom part of the screen, because those are really looked at from a federal perspective as one interchange. And by removing that connection, it really forces in the modeling traffic to do one of two things. One, to either stay on 26, go across the French Bar River and exit onto Patton, then come back across the Bowling Bridges, or to continue on 240 and then utilize any of the existing 240 interchanges, more than likely Montford being the next applicable location. With that in mind, and we've modeled and looked at this, and again, coordinated with FHWA, it does meet the level of service required by the purpose and need for the project. It will eventually probably require that improvements for Montford and that intersection need to be looked at, potentially funded with a separate project. But in the design year, in the evaluation with FHWA and our traffic analysis, it does meet the level of service. It just does open up, you know, a new set of traffic patterns, as that connection that has always been there will be severed and have to be replaced, obviously, by the other existing movements that we have. The other big change in this area through the O&R process was, and again, an area that we prioritized based off our coordination with local stakeholders, was the impact to Hill Street. Hill Street in the RIPS proposal, which you see on the left, had a significant grade increase. I think we were increasing the amount of fill on Hillcrest really was pushing upwards of 20-25 feet in some places, significant wall construction both on the residential and the 240 side. And that was really tied to the what ultimately became a three-tiered structure between 240, the exit ramp going over 240 from Patton, and then the Hillcrest Connector Bridge really was driving all that grade up. But once we removed the interchange, we're able to reevaluate the grades in that area, really shrink everything down. We're able to decrease the impact of Hill Street almost entirely. As you can see on the picture on the right, Hill Street from the Baptist Church all the way around the corner will basically remain untouched by 2513. The last piece of this, in this area specifically, is the Hillcrest Connector Road. You can see on the left, the Connector Road bridge is shifted closer down to Patton and has a separate pedestrian structure there and a roundabout on the Hillcrest side. This has always been a significant challenge because of the grade issues here. If you can see on the left side, there's a dark line around the backside of that roundabout that signifies a pretty significant wall. It really, from a view shed perspective, really kind of put the Hillcrest apartments kind of down in a hole. And was always something that, from the local stakeholders' perspective, was that we wanted to evaluate. So through the O&R process, we looked at alternatives and ultimately were able to implement what you see on the right, which is we slid the bridge closer to the existing Atkins Street Bridge alignment. The roundabout is split to the other side of 240 because of the space constraints. And then what it allowed us to do is allow the Hillcrest or Connector Road to be grade independent of 240 and Hill Street. And it really allowed us to follow the existing grade down from the entrance to the Hillcrest apartments down to Patton, and really opens up that whole area, eliminates the wall entirely, while also still maintaining all the connections out of the Hillcrest apartments back to Patton, down to Riverside, and across to Hill Street. The other thing and difference here is that the bridge obviously is a little shorter because it's a better crossing location, and the pedestrian structure has been combined with the vehicle structure, but again, the width there remains. That structure has full multi-use path width. included. Okay? So again, just an overview of that area. And really, I think an accomplishment of the O&R is that this was really something that, an area that early on in the O&R process, that we wanted to focus on with our stakeholders, and I think really ends up with a design that's much more in line with the future visions for the corridor, and opens up a lot of space and ultimately helps us achieve our project goals in terms of cost. Really interesting. Here's some visualizations of that. You can see the new O&R design on the east side of the river. You can see the walls that were there are no longer there, and you can see Hill Street basically maintaining its existing condition around the curve. You can see the reduced impacts to Hillcrest. Again, that new Hillcrest connector follows basically existing grade down, and is much more in line with the apartments. This also shows the pedestrian connections that were retained along Patton and the significant improvements to the Bowen bridges, with the removal of I-26 traffic from that. But it gives you a general overview of that side of the project. Go ahead. This is the visualization of the other side. It shows, again, the bridge that was completely removed is no longer shown. It's replaced by the loop ramp that you can see up on kind of the upper right. This does show the changes that predate O&R, the reduced profile of the bridges across the river to the extent that they actually land. I know in the 2018, that's one long structure that spanned all of that, but the profile has been reduced enough that it's actually multiple structures as the structure actually, touches down in two places from between Patton and the other side of the river. And then you also see the I-26 over Patton Avenue configuration in its final form for O&R in this visualization. So next steps. Now that O&R is complete, and all these changes to this proposal have been incorporated, we will be updating the project website to reflect the changes to scope. And all the changes both from procurement and from O&R. And we are also working towards, as we shared with local stakeholders, and it's been the intention since the beginning of the O&R process, to schedule a public project update meeting. We're working on that now, hopefully have a date and a venue soon for that, where we'll be able to share the differences from the 2018 plan to the current plan in detail with the public in an open house forum. With the O&R process complete and the agreement in place, with the design build team, design work on the project will commence, but that we will continue to coordinate with local stakeholders as we work towards a final design. Because again, these are still, while we do have a bid price locked in and a lump sum price, we do have a lot of work to do in finishing the design, utility relocation, and right-of-way. And then beyond that, the department is continuing to evaluate construction phasing and works on traffic control for additional time and cost savings. Our commitment to, again, for cost containment on this project because of the fiscal constraints is not stopping with O&R. We're continuing to apply those same concepts to this and adjacent projects. And we'll continue to coordinate with the MPO and local stakeholders on that. And the estimated schedule for the project at this point, now that we are underway, is the right-of-way acquisition will begin in fall of 2025, utility relocation in spring of 26, and construction in fall of 2026. And I would just say, I think these processes, both the design build procurement and the O&R process, are really what allowed us to overcome the significant financial challenge for this project in the past year. And without them, we would not be able to move forward. So we appreciate the coordination efforts that we've had over the past 6 months in working towards what we feel is a design that has a lot of benefits for this community and the greater Western North Carolina area, at a cost that, again, that funding is authorized and in place, and ready to go. Again, thank you. Any questions?
Yes, thank you. There's been significant concern about greenways and pedestrian traffic through that area. Could you speak briefly on the enhancements to that with the design build?
So yeah, so the greenway connections are all in place from the pre-procurement design, so they're all maintained. They have made some enhancements to even some of those. I know if you flip back maybe to the colored sheet, Tristan, you might can see it, but or maybe go to visualization, the last one. You can see that the greenway really connection extends all the way from downtown, down Patton, across the Bowling Bridges on both sides, obviously with those significant spaces opened up by removing 26 traffic. Continues on down to the Patton interchange. You can see up in the top right corner, you see the multi-use path that follows and kind of bumps out to the corner. That path ultimately goes all the way to Haywood and connects really Haywood all the way up to Patton and then into downtown. And as a part of this design, that whole alignment, again, has been maintained as an ADA compliant trail. Optimizations were made wherever possible with the grade, which is what you see that kind of jut out there. But those improvements are made. Again, from the other pedestrian standpoint, you've got multi-use path along the Hill Street connector, down to Riverside Drive, and then that connection all the way out Riverside Drive to Broadway, which ties into other projects in that area. And really connects from a pedestrian standpoint, kind of every aspect of the project, including the greenway that continues on Patton all the way to Louisiana.
And there's been significant concerns also about Hillcrest and pedestrian traffic in that area. My understanding is this helps improve that.
Correct. So Hillcrest, as it stands today, really every Atkins Street bridge is the only way in and out. This moves that access and flips it to where coming out of the Hillcrest apartment, you'll have both pedestrian and vehicular access to your right down to Patton, to your left down to Riverside Drive, and straight across to Hill Street. And all those connections for both pedestrian vehicles are maintained at the existing entrance into Hillcrest. It really provides connections that the apartments there have never had before, which is a great benefit.
And to note, Zoom user, which I believe is Commissioner Sloan from Buncombe County, asked specifically about the connections on Riverside Drive. Can you talk about those a little bit more?
From a pedestrian standpoint?
Yeah, the multi-use path connection with them specifically.
Yeah, so the pedestrian connections and accommodations on Riverside Drive have all been maintained as a part of the O&R process. That includes bike lanes and the multi-use path, including, and we've had direct coordination here with the MPO to extend that with this project to the limits of the Wilma Diamond extension on Broadway, so that full connection can be made with this project. There's also coordination with the City of Asheville and what I would refer to as the North Rad Tip. And also that project is being pursued separately as a light project with the city, and we're involved in that development. But as those plans start to progress, we'll also potentially look at incorporating those into this construction to kind of streamline all that, so that all those connections with the Greenway network on Riverside Drive can be made all at the same time. There's no gaps, there's no lag in that process.
And I do want to give quick kudos to Nathan and Tim, especially. You noticed in the initial refined design that the Riverside Drive improvements were pulled back 500 feet from Broadway, which would have been a gap from the Buncombe County's $15 million Woodfin Greenway project to the rest of the Greenway network. I don't think I've ever seen a design change happen that quickly when we pointed it out. So thank you guys for jumping on that.
Yeah, it's critical for us to maintain that connection, and didn't want that to be sacrificed with the Broadway interchange changes. So glad we're able to coordinate and get that corrected.
Councilmember Romney?
Thank you. I have a few questions. Daniel had presented at the city council meeting, at our meeting last Tuesday, but we have a lot of new information since then, because we hadn't heard about the flyover. So this is the first public meeting that we'd heard about the flyover concept. So I have a few questions. One, we knew there would be changes due to value engineering of this project. Have you identified some stated benefits other than cost to moving in this direction?
Specifically with the I-26 and patent configuration, I think less specifically to that identification, but more to the broad Archer Rock joint venture bid plans, which really have to be taken as a whole, because that's what's attached to that opening bid of $1.14 billion. There are significant improvements that go along with that change, including the profile of the bridges across the French Broad River. They're significantly lower. Again, I pointed out earlier with the fact that those bridges land now, and instead of one large structure, it's, multiple structures with connections there. The other significant change from a safety perspective is this design eliminates all of the design exceptions that were in place with the 2018 preliminary plan, which is, again, a part of the design build process, because we want, as we go through procurement, our design to improve. And from a safety perspective, this definitely does that. So that would just be two. There are a lot of other, like, operational improvements from a standpoint of level service. There are some changes to some of the braiding of ramps and those kind of things that get pretty technical. But from a broad standpoint, when you look at the Archer Rock joint venture bid plans as a whole, even though, again, they were negatively looked at because of the Patton Avenue 26 configuration, there are significant improvements in other areas of the design as well.
How high is the bridge going to fly over Patton Avenue? Are we talking 20 feet, 30 feet? What is the expectation?
You can go back to those visualizations, but it's pretty standard for standard overpass. Again, as a part of their change, they reduced the profile of all the bridges, even leading across the French Broad River. So you can see in this visualization, and I just in front of me and don't have it memorized to tell you a number off the top of my head, but that gives you, some context. And it's generally in line with the standard overpass, probably 20 to 25 feet at most.
With this significant change, does that trigger a new sound study? And if so, when does that take place? I know impacted communities are being asked about mitigation and sound walls.
So with the design build process, really regardless of this change to Patton, our design build process by policy requires the sound study to be redone. So the sound study that was done pre-procurement has always been draft. So it will be completely redone by the design build team. Now that all the O&R changes have been implemented, because really we start that sound study in its final form once we've kind of locked in the design changes from O&R and procurement. So now that that's done, over the next couple of months, the final noise study will be completed, including the aspects of that involve public involvement. Once we identify the potential for a sound wall, as you know, it goes to the community ultimately for a final vote on if they want that constructed or not. But all of that's redone, and that's standard to our design build process.
Okay, I've got just a couple more. There's a lot of community concern around this one. So I heard that with the changes at Hill Street, we're still going to keep the Hillcrest connection to that neighborhood. Are there reduced impacts to businesses and commercial properties? I know there were several that were impacted by the flooding in the River Arts District and that were also anticipated to, like, overlappingly be affected by this project. If there's going to be less taking of that land, when will those businesses and property owners be notified?
Yes, there will be a reduction in acreage. There you go. So this purple area is what you see as reduction, purple and pink. It is significant when you look at the sum total across the total of the project. But there are no areas where it completely removes a specific claim to a business or residence. More specifically, what you're talking about is the properties, either commercial or residential, that are along the edges of the design, where just hypothetically, their impact may have been 3 acres. Potentially with this reduction, it may drop to 1.5, if that makes sense. It doesn't completely remove any impact except for that along Hill Street, and a lot of that was already in existing right-of-way. But it's an overall reduction, but it doesn't completely eliminate any really specific impacts at this time.
Okay, I know one of the things that was coming up, it was in the paper, a residential property owner was concerned. It was like, just go ahead and take the whole thing if you're taking most of it. So I think people will have a lot of questions and concerns about that to want to hear more.
And I think that's where our intention has been since the very conception of O&R 6-7 months ago, is that it would end once we get to this final design stage, that we would be able to go to the public fully, and that's what we're working towards now in the next month or so. I mean, I think we're hoping that that meeting potentially is the end of March. It could slide into the 1st of April, but it will be a open house style meeting. We'll have these plans, full roll plots on the wall, and property owners will be able to come specifically look at their property, meet with right-of-way agent staff that we'll have with us at the meeting, and be able to address those concerns. There is our intention with that process and that meeting that we'll hopefully be able to announce soon.
Okay, I got 2 more. I'll be quick. What does it look like to switch with Patton being on top? What is the trade-off? Obviously, you've already considered that since these maps were supposedly available in the summer.
As far as the trade-off really, I think, comes from, and I know it was covered in public comment, I mean, is we understood the desire of the community, and it was reflected in the scoring process, but ultimately was overridden by the cost and schedule savings, as I covered. I think one of the things too that, and I didn't specifically talk about this in the presentation, but that we have discussed with local stakeholders throughout the O&R process has been mitigations of this. Again, and when I talk about continued coordination with local stakeholders as we work towards final design, that includes applying the approved aesthetic guidelines to the structure over Patton, pedestrian lighting if it's requested, potential agreements that we could work on for uses for that property under the structure post completion of the project. All those conversations have already begun in the O&R process, and now we'll continue on, as we move towards final design over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I know some communities are doing things like farmers markets underneath, and other communities are trying to get rid of their flyovers because of the impact on the property value. But my last one, because I know others probably have questions, is I'm hearing some community disagreement about our non-compliance with the NEPA design of record. What does that mean for our region? Are there any ways that we're not compliant with the process, and what does that look like?
We are compliant. It's been reviewed and coordinated throughout the bid process and the award and the O&R process with FHWA. I know Derek Weaver was mentioned earlier. He's been involved in this process and the reviews. Again, there is, and as I mentioned, just by policy and inherent nature of what design build is, there is a confidentiality piece to those 13 months we spent in procurement. O&R, thankfully, was a much more collaborative process, but all of that fits within the NEPA guidance and the document, the FIS and the ROD. The purpose and need of the project is still met. All the commitments, both to communities, are still incorporated, and all the benefits of this project from a pedestrian standpoint, cyclist standpoint, congestion, all those things are still in place. I think O&R specifically even, improves the long-term goals, on the east side of the river. We've talked to the city and worked with them with their Patton Avenue study and, how this incorporates with that. I think the benefits of this all really fit within the established NEPA process that was completed prior to procurement. And nothing that was done through procurement or O&R since has violated that process.
Thank you so much. I've asked a lot of questions. I appreciate taking up so much time.
No trouble.
Thank you, Ken. Those were important questions. Thank you. Is there any other questions, comments? Thank you so much, Nathan. I'm sure that you will be hearing a lot more from the
I'm sure, and we're looking forward to being able to get our public information and update meetings scheduled and being able to talk to them directly at that time.
Yeah, I do want to give another kudos on one item that Nathan just touched on, which was the Haywood Road interchange. I think when we first talked about that, and I said, please, Region G is, I think unofficially 700 million as a whole at that point. That camel doesn't need more straws. It's dead, partially decayed.
Yeah.
I think at first it was, well, this is very likely to happen. But it ended up not happening. So thank you guys for getting a Region G project at some point in the next X amount of years. Yeah, be fantastic.
Yeah. Next quarter. Thank you. Next is the draft 2026-2035.
Okay, I know we are pretty much over time, so I will be as quick as I possibly can for talking about more than $700 million in projects getting decommitted. So, sorry for the spoiler. So with the draft 2026 through 2035 STIP, just as a reminder, the State Transportation Improvement Program, that's a 10-year document that shows the schedule and funding for regionally significant transportation projects across the state of North Carolina. It is a federally required document, and remember, we have our own regional subset known as the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. To note, probably the most important part of this, especially for today, is this document's required to be fiscally constrained, meaning there has to be an expectation that of all the projects and costs that you're expecting, you have to show that there's a reasonable expectation that you'll have the money to cover those costs. So with this draft STIP that came out January 31st, you likely received a couple of emails from us. Division 13 and 14 are planning drop-in public meetings at their division headquarters. So Division 13 for Madison and Buncombe folks, that is on Orange Street, just north of 240 in Asheville. For Division 14, that is in Silva. So drop in. I think Hannah and Steve are the people who will be ready for drop-ins. Other public comments due through the DOT's portal they set up. They're due by April 4th. Then moving forward, the Board of Transportation is going to consider adoption in June. The MPO is required to consider adoption, but September 30th is our drop dead date that we're planning for August of 2025. Just a quick summary, no new projects are being funded in the STIP. So we talked a lot about projects in P 7.0, but none of those projects are being funded due to the financial situation at NCDOT. Many projects are being delayed, and several projects are being decommitted or defunded. I've been asked a lot what is driving a lot of these issues. I think there's a lot of things, actually, but one that you can't ignore is the National Highway Construction Cost Index. Went up quite a lot since 2021, and it is hard to avoid financial issues when your costs shoot up that much. This is just the paragraph we received from NCDOT. You don't have to read it all, or I should say I won't read it all right now. You do have to read it all. But their process to go through and determine what projects remain committed or not committed was largely based on the rankings that were done by MPOs and RPOs last summer, as well as looking at where projects were in project development, as well as other things such as project order. So to get into our region, the projects being decommitted in Haywood County, there are 3. The first that I'll mention is U4712. That is planned improvements to South Main Street. That is a project that's been around for a number of SIP cycles. It has had previous corridor planning done by the town of Waynesville, and we know that that is a high priority for the town of Waynesville. U6158. That is the intersection improvement at US 276 and Crimes Cove Road to realign that intersection and look at the roundabout. U6159, that's an access management project on Russ Avenue. To clarify, that is the section of Russ Avenue that is not currently under construction. That's north of US 2374. In Buncombe County, 3, technically 4 projects. One, U6047, that's the planned widening of Sandhill and Sardis Road. That is planned to be decommitted. U2801AB, that is the remaining section of Sweet Creek. Just as a reminder, last summer, we split Sweet Creek with the hopes of keeping one segment of it going. This is that segment that we hope to keep going and is planned to be decommitted. U5832, that's the planned improvements on Swannanoa River Road between Biltmore and South Tunnel. Just to note, the other Swannanoa River Road from South Tunnel to Tunnel was decommitted last SIP cycle. And also A10AA, that is the widening of Future 26. We discussed that project last fall, but that plan to be decommitted. There's one small section near the New Stock Road interchange remaining funded. In Henderson County, it's one project, that's the interchange at US 64 and I-26 that plans to be decommitted. So just to note, some of the projects that are planned to be decommitted, some saw no cost increases, at least from one SIP cycle to the next, but you can see others had some pretty significant increases. Sweet Creek from $117 million to $215, Swannanoa River Road from $48 million to $145, and the US 64 Four Seasons Boulevard interchange from $30 million to over $143 million. Those are large cost increases that are going to be tough to incorporate without something changing on the revenue side. Just to note, in terms of all these projects, we're looking at about $782 million in project expenses being decommitted from the STIP. If you include A10AA, that is over $1 billion. And also, as Nathan touched on in his presentation, there's also some other parts of projects that are being cut that we'll have to consider in future funding cycles, such as the Broadway interchange with I-26. So some of the improvements planned for there, I-26 reduced their scope, so we're going to have Broadway interchange improvement project planned for some point in the future. Also, project delays. A number of projects, their beginning construction date in the STIP, or in the draft STIP, has been changed. So Section 8C of the connector from 25 to 27. I won't go through all of them, just some of the larger ones. Liberty Road interchange from 27 to 29. In Haywood and Henderson, note the 1923 modernization from Canton to Buncombe County is going from 2030 to 2033. and the 191 widening R2588B is going from 26 to 29. That is the summary of the draft STIP. Again, that'll be coming back to the MPO for consideration for adoption in August after it goes to the Board of Transportation. Are there any questions on this item?
There's lots of concern, but no question.
I suspect it's because we got a lot of movement. And the thing that's sitting out there, like it seems like on everything, is Helene. And how, I mean, cash is cash within the Department of Transportation like every place else. And so if, let's say, the feds or the state don't come through with the monies necessary to do a range of stuff, and it's still determined that we got to do it, where is that money going to come from? That's what keeps me up at night. I think Kim was about to jump in.
Yeah, I think I don't have questions so much as a concern that I share with my neighbors about funding priorities is that we made decision over the past few years to prioritize I-26 instead of our main corridors with the limited funding that we have and the costs that we are dealing with. But one of the curiosities I have is, does staff have an idea of how long it will take with the projections that we have to get these kinds of projects back in our STIP? Because these are corridors we're talking about building affordable housing and bringing in jobs and growing good local jobs. We want manufacturing jobs that are more resilient and not so dependent on just one industry. But I mean, it seems like we're talking decades, realistically.
I'll just note that, you know, I've often heard projects being decommitted as being delayed. But given the way that STIP development works in North Carolina, there's no real way to say if or when projects will go from decommitted to funded again in the STIP. So unless you specify that that delay is somewhere from 10 to 1,000 years, I don't think that's really the whole truth. And so, I mean, Kim, I think to your point, with our MCP, the 25-year project development, we'll be putting together a 25-year budget to look at that and how much we can squeeze back in reasonably over the next 25 years. But I do want to emphasize to folks that the projects being decommitted don't get any special status with the next round of funding. They are going to compete with every other project that is submitted. And so there's no guarantee that the projects that were funded are going to be first in line. So that's something I want to be clear on, and I know we're well over time, so I don't want to go too far down the road, but I do want to make the point that the optimization and refinement, you know, specific elements as you may have issue with or not, to me, that is something that we really need to think about more. Funding with budget or designing with a budget in mind is something that I really think we need more of. Do we want, you know, the most perfect project we can get, or do we want to work on more of our transportation network? Hannah's been on far too many meetings with me where I've said, what on earth are we doing? How did this project get so large? And a lot of times it is, well, you know, the traffic forecast or something else. It works better if we do it this way. To me, it's, well, is that worth tripling the cost? That rarely seems to be the question. So I think the optimization and refinement and considering costs more in design, I think it's something we really have to do moving forward.
I would add to, I agree with what you said, and I just had the question put from Councilmember Hensley. I mean, at the heart of it, though, is the funding mechanism is broken. It's been broken. I served as a freshman county commissioner in 2005 on the Blue Ribbon panel that was dealing with the gap between needs and funding. And almost nothing has occurred since that point in time. And this gap is only getting bigger. And you add Helene to it, you add a few other things to it. You know, unless the legislature takes that on and decides that they're going to find another source, we're in a position where we can't build anything we don't have money to do. I think that's at the heart of the issue, Kristen. I think what you said is right also. I agree with you.
I don't want to belittle the point, but I do want to echo something Kim said. The town of Waynesville, we made hard decisions based on the anticipation of this project. And we have decimated a portion of our town in anticipation of the project, and now it's not going to happen. So it's quite difficult, and it gives me a lot of heartburn for especially South Main Street.
I think there's going to be more heartburn, and one or two of those projects we've already begun to acquire right away. I mean, we took people's property anticipating that it would be used in the pretty near term.
My major concern about South Main Street is that we worked diligently to keep it in cost, and it was the only one up there that had no cost increase. And we worked hundreds of man hours of staff time, and it just all seems so wasteful. That's my 2 cents. Anyone else have two cents to that one? Yes, but Chuck, you are absolutely correct. If we have no money, we can't spend it. And they have to rethink that. Whether how we get those funds differently from gas tax or some other way of getting those funds.
I'll throw in a couple more things. It starts with a better estimate. We've been working on estimating tools. I mean, some of these projects, even if you rolled the inflation factors, retroactively went back through and looked at them, they were still drastically undervalued. And then there's a myriad of factors for that, and a couple of them that we're one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and in a fast growing place, the one thing that grows as fast as that is the cost of property. Our right-of-way costs have gone through the roof on projects. Any estimate we had on right-of-way that's more than 24 months old is well out of date at this point. So, and then you compound that with a region like ours where so many folks want to live. That makes it even harder. So you have that, and then you have the construction cost, material cost escalation, labor cost escalation. In 2005, when you were on the panel, I was an assistant district engineer, and we were letting contracts to pave roads, asphalt $34 a ton. We were paying $40 an hour for a tandem truck with a driver, and that bought their fuel and put cash in their pocket. That same truck's about $170, $180 now, and that asphalt's $120 to $130 a ton. So, all those things add to it, and yeah, we definitely designed with the end in mind, and a reasonable end is going to be critical in that too. But there are a lot of parts. If Chuck couldn't figure it out, we know it's tough. So we just got to, every opportunity you get, we need to be thinking about what are those factors and what can we mitigate.
I do want to emphasize one thing before moving on that Tim said. Planning or having a good concept in mind before budgeting and committing to the project. That's something we just started talking about at the prioritization work group, but that's part of what we discussed last time we went through cuts, is that a lot of times what we see is projects costs go up significantly when we start to learn more about the project, which to me is like, that's the worst incentive in the world. When you learn more about a project, its cost is going to go up and it's going to be less competitive. That's not ideal. And I think you see that in a few of these estimate changes. I mean, Swananoa River Road, you're really seeing a more refined concept. And Tim, jump in if I'm misspeaking. But you're seeing a more refined concept that has significantly changed the cost. The cost is going to change a lot anyway. But to me, that's why things like corridor studies, feasibility studies, the express designs the department is doing are really important. We need to do a better job of making it so it's more of a pipeline and less of a scatter shot of let's study as much as we can. Hopefully one of those will get funded. And I mean, that's not a department criticism. That is us as well as, I mean, the whole system.
Any other comments? This has been a very long meeting, so thank you everyone for sticking with us. Next is the 2050 socioeconomic projection.
All right, I had a bunch of slides for you. I'm going to go quick. This is another item we're trying to preview for you all. This is how much growth we're expecting by 2050 and where it's going to go. That plays a central role in the region's travel demand model. Just in a nutshell, where we are planning for there to be growth, that plays a role in identifying some of the future congestion issues through the model, or not issues. Just to note, I get a lot of comments about there's an apartment in the again, this study is looking at population growth, where it's likely to go, as well as employment growth. We've tasked our consultants with 4 different scenarios. So we'll be looking at business as usual, that is growing the way we have been growing, a consolidated growth scenario, which is increasing growth in areas with lower vehicle miles traveled, so more growth in our urban areas. Another we're calling dissipated growth, which is increasing growth in our rural areas and less growth in our urban areas. And accelerated growth, which is more population and employment growth than is currently projected by the Office of State and Budget Management. This is an important thing. I think I have a slide in here. It's very wonky, but it's also impactful. This is from the environmental impact statement for I-26. We had a long debate over 8 versus 6 lanes. The last time we did this study and updated the model, that helped settle that 6 lanes would be acceptable through West Asheville. So just to preview, that decision will be coming to you all most likely next month. And I will say you have to pick an alternative. No getting out of it this time. And that will be coming back next month. Perfect. Thank you.
Next is MCDOT Division 13 and 14 updates. 13?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I think Nathan covered 2513 connector piece. I did want to touch on AA and AB. As a reminder, the scope for that is the I-40 section, which replaces the concrete on I-40, also adds a westbound off-ramp to Smoky Park Highway, and adds a new eastbound off-ramp from I-40 eastbound to I-26 eastbound, so that becomes 2 lanes. And extends to Pond Road. We did let that back in July of last year, but started work was delayed because the contractor was helping with some lien recovery, but they are anticipating starting within the next week. That'll begin with barrier wall installation on I-40, and you'll see some tree clearing starting in March. I'll skip the I-26 widening. I do want to mention in the Blue Ridge Parkway Bridge area, we did just have a westbound and eastbound shift, so be careful, stay alert as you're driving through that area. Want to touch on Swananoa River Road repairs. NCDOT crews are still working on NC 81. My understanding is it's now open from Walmart to US 70 or Tunnel Road. We had previously opened Fairview Road to Tunnel Road, but I think as of Friday last week, we've opened Walmart all the way from Walmart back to Tunnel Road, if that's not correct. Okay. We're still 3 or 4 weeks away from opening all the way from Biltmore Ave. Remaining work, pipe replacement, paving, guardrail installation before we can open that entire stretch, all work weather permitting. Repairs to the Wood Ave South Tunnel Road Bridge are complete except for some railing on the bridge. They should have started that this week or next week. And then we also have a concrete crew working to replace curb and sidewalk at that intersection. And then the signal work is being coordinated as well. So we're still 3 or 4 weeks away from opening that, but work is still progressing. I think Tristan covered the project development update, all the schedule changes in the draft SIP, and then as well as our public drop-in session at division office next week. So I won't really cover anything on this, but you have the report. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Thank you. So I'm impressed that they're out there working right now. 12 degrees, so kudos to them. Division 14.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'll make this extremely brief. Construction side of things, same projects you've been seeing for a while with a couple of exceptions. In Haywood County, the US 276 there, the Jonathan Creek project, that let and hasn't, no one's mobilized on it yet, but it will be starting. Of course, you have the couple of bridges there on I-40 in Haywood County that have started construction. And also the US 64 project in Henderson County from Blythe Street out to White Pine Drive that let and will be starting soon. On the project development side of things, kind of the same thing that Hannah said. I think that Tristan covered all the changes. You do see on the that there's an extra column there just with the fiscal year let date, just to help you compare the old let date with the draft STIP let date. I'll leave it at that just for sake of time, unless someone has questions.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank y'all.
Do we have Suzanne or someone from Federal Highway? Okay. Subcommittee update?
I'll say the subcommittee reports are in your packet. If you would like to check them out, I will just jump into legislative updates really quick, and because they're important this month. So the first thing is there's a new U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy. There have been a number of executive orders that have made some impacts. The one is Unleashing American Energy. That mentions halting disbursements of federal funds for various programs, including the Department of Transportation. There was a memo that came out afterwards that emphasized the halt of funds. That has been, I believe a federal judge has overruled that. I think that is still being figured out. But funds are still like coming back. Yes. And so just to note that, ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity, that's another one. But just to note, that rolls back a lot of environmental justice executive orders from the past and a lot of the guidance that was put in place. USDOT rescinded 3 orders. One is establishing the USDOT Equity Council. Another is rescinding the required climate adaptation and resilience that was required to be put into policies and programs. Another order that was rescinded provided guidance on how environmental justice should be incorporated into policies, programs, and projects. We're still looking into the potential impacts on the MPO's required work with environmental justice. So with implementation of executive orders addressing energy, climate change, diversity, and gender, that directs USDOT to rescind policies, programs, and funding related to climate change and environmental justice, DEI, and the Justice 40 initiative. One of the new U.S. DOT orders ensuring reliance upon sound economic analysis and Department of Transportation policies, programs, and activities. That shifts a number of emphasis points and criteria. So projects must demonstrate economic benefits. The social cost of carbon will no longer factor into funding or policy decisions. U.S. DOT is instructed to consider how families and communities will be impacted to ensure projects do not impose undue burdens. Funding priorities with user pay models, economic benefits, and job growth. And discourages U.S. DOT funding for projects being driven by local, social, climate, or political goals. Another one of the U.S. DOT orders rescinded the greenhouse gas performance rule. Just to note with that, that is a performance target that has been killed, I believe, multiple times in the courts. So the overall impact is pretty negligible. It was dead before this. NEVI, I want to touch on this. That's the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. That was a recurring, or is a recurring formula fund program for electric vehicle infrastructure. To note, there's 56 charging stations operational across the country. That's a program that started in 2022 with $5 billion. That's a whole nother issue to go down. New order holds all funding not previously obligated.
What does that mean? Complete funds,
right? So it won't get too much higher. But North Carolina impacts are important. Phase 1 of the NEVI rollout was previously obligated. That's moving forward. There are no charging stations in our region as part of that package. To note, the closest is in Marion. What was in plan for phase 2, which is not obligated, and therefore looks unlikely to be moving forward, had 4 planned improvements in our region. Also, a number of grants have been pulled from the grants.gov website. One thing that this board previously approved us pursuing was a PROTECT grant for a regional transportation resiliency plan. So that has been pulled. And we will wait until we get additional news on that front. And also the FLAP, or the Federal Land Access Program, was also pulled as well. And we've been told that new agreements with U.S. DOT are at least not moving forward at this time. TIP amendment approvals, you all received a couple of emails about this. There's now an additional layer of approvals required by the Office of General Counsel at the federal level. Tim Anderson was just telling me that 60 to 90 days for STIP approval processes wasn't long enough. He's laughing for everyone online. Just to note, we're seeing what's happening with delays. Just want to note that. State bills, I won't go through all of these, but House Bill 47 is looking at providing $100 million to the private road and bridge repair program as part of disaster relief. So just to note, that's a big one. House Bill 112 allows higher speed limits on interstates. That goes for 60. That's correct. Higher speed limits are associated with about an 8 to 9% increase in crashes. And faster speeds likely to be more severe. Senate Bill 61, just to note, looks at prohibiting tolls on I-95. Not sure the status of that, but just to note, we do have a toll study or a managed lane study on I-40 that is currently underway. So that's all I've got for today. Take us out of here. Or do we have one more?
We have public comment. Do we have any public comment?
Potentially.
Thank you for letting me attend. That's all.
Thank you for coming. We used to have lots more attendance before COVID. But
don't know if Joe wants to make a public comment. He had his hand raised.
If anyone online would like to make public comment before we adjourn, please raise your hand or just drop something in the chat.
Daniel.
Yes.
Hi.
Joe.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm going to start my 3 minutes here. It was very frustrating listening to that presentation. Our community has been working on I-26 since 1989. The Asheville Design Center, I told you 1 year was 2,000 of our hours. We weren't doing this because we were trying to slow it down. We were trying to speed it up. And we did it in good faith to bring information forward and follow all of the laws. It's incredibly frustrating that the EIS said that there'd only be $140 million of impact on our tax base. They were off by a factor of 10. For folks that live in Haywood County or Transylvania County, this is my county with my tax base. I'm a citizen here, and we have 30% of our city is non-taxable. We just heard testimony from an engineer about the NEPA. And all due respect, an engineer is an engineer. They don't have any expertise in real estate. I am an expert in real estate. I do this for a living. I help other communities build their tax base. And it's frustrating to watch somebody shoot themselves in the foot while standing on my foot. We are losing hundreds of millions of dollars of local tax base by a design decision that admittedly our state engineer told us he didn't have any impacts about air, noise, sound pollution, air pollution next to the site. No one wants to build a 4 to 6 or 8 story building next to an arterial highway. It doesn't make sense. As a real estate investor, it is an impact. You have just made conversation, there are apparently decisions made to do this without having that data. So I will again read to you NEPA section 1500.1b. Procedures must ensure that environmental information is available to the public officials and citizens before decisions are made and before actions are taken. The information must be of high quality, accurate scientific analysis, expert agency comments, and public scrutiny are essential to implementing NEPA. We have been told that we are getting this highway over the top of Patton Avenue, and that decision was made. The only answer that was given to Councilor Rumi was because of cost. That's it. We haven't considered air pollution. We haven't considered sound pollution. We haven't considered real estate effects. We didn't get a good view of that highway up close. We got views of it from very far away. That isn't fair, competent, substantial information to make these decisions. It's terribly frustrating with the amount of money we're going to be losing with this. And we've done all we could as a community. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, perfect timing, Jeff. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you, folks.